Today is June 25th, 2024. We're here with Daniel Ambrosi, photographer and artist that we'll discuss more about too. This is John Plute. We are at the Computer History Museum. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Let's just start off with some basic information. Can you tell me your name and give some background on your career and up to the, your photography work just in general?
So I'm Daniel Ambrosi, and fine art for me is actually my fourth career. I started my education in architecture and actually got a master's in 3D graphics, but the first 10 years of my professional career were in architecture, working for a large commercial firm in Seattle, and doing a fair amount of work there in computer-aided design and 3D animation or architectural visualization, given my background and my graduate work. I went on to make a transition down into Silicon Valley to do tech marketing with Silicon Graphics. I, in fact, even worked in this building, gave presentations in this very building back when it was owned by Silicon Graphics and was their North American field operations. I spent about 10 years in corporate marketing for tech companies before transitioning to a small business owner as a marketing consultant with my wife and partner, another almost 20 years with an overlap with the fine art thing that I was doing for a while. I have been working in earnest on this art project, Dreamscapes, for almost 13 years and full-time since the COVID lockdown in about 2020.
So there were some good things came out of COVID. I'm just curious, backing up a little bit, when you were doing your CAD work in architecture, what sort of programs were you using?
In the earliest days in the professional world, the only firms that could afford CAD and computer graphics were the largest firms, and those were running on mini workstations. The company I worked for, MBBJ, had a slew of Sun workstations, and it was within about 5 years that PC-based CAD, courtesy of Autodesk and AutoCAD, came along and started to make that transition into more affordable CAD workstations, and it became more, widespread.
Okay. Before you started working with AI, you were doing fine arts work. What sort of work were you doing before you started using the AI with your work?
Yeah, that question leads me to really try to explain that this art project sort of came up spontaneously, almost by accident. I did not set out to become a fine artist. I am an avid hiker, skier, and traveler, and I especially love special places, beautiful landscapes, those sorts of scenes that really move me powerfully and personally. I've always wanted to share with others, and I've dabbled in photography for a long time. My first actual course in photography was the summer after my freshman year at Cornell. I took a photography course there. And I always found it difficult to really share the experiences I was having in great landscapes with others through traditional photography. And over the years, I experimented, especially when we got into the world of digital cameras and computer graphics tools like Photoshop and so on, to use techniques to try to get closer to the human experience of landscapes than what a traditional camera could do. Humans see in a very different way, with a much wider field of view, higher dynamic range, much more detail, and so on. And it turns out that I was at a canyon in Utah in 2011, and all these different things I had been experimenting with came together out of necessity by virtue of the scene I was attempting to capture. And I created my first XYZ photograph, which was a way of combining all these techniques. Technically, I was not the first to do this. These are what are called multi-row high dynamic range panoramas. I captured multiple views horizontally and vertically, multiple exposures deep, and put all this together into a way that allowed me to capture a very vibrant, wide-angle, immersive, highly detailed scene. That breakthrough for me made me decide to pursue this attempt to share my experiences in earnest with others in a much more concentrated way. That was the first of two breakthroughs that I had that really led this fine art career to come into fruition. The second was about 4 years later. Google released a piece of AI software called Deep Dream. It was open source code that, just to be clear, was not meant to create art. It was not trained on other people's art. It was part of a computer vision system tasked with doing image recognition. It turns out that they were having some challenges trying to understand what their image recognition AI was doing. And one engineer had the clever idea to develop a piece of diagnostic code that could peer under the hood of the AI and kind of see what it was thinking. And the results were quite astounding. It almost looked like the AI was hallucinating as it tried to make sense of these images. And when I saw that, I saw the opportunity to maybe use this to take my landscapes into a new direction. I had understood over time, especially through studying the great landscape painters of the past, and especially the Impressionists, that landscapes are not just seen. They also make you feel and think. And when I came up with my XYZ photography technique, I kind of was able to transition from images that just were visual representations of the landscape to landscapes that made you feel something. Before I even started using AI, my technique would engender the response from people, wow, they'd catch their breath and say, it feels like I can walk right into the scene. So I kind of got partway there. And then when I saw what Deep Dream was doing, I realized that I could create images that would also make people think, that perhaps concealed at a fine detail a different way of seeing the landscape that would surprise people when they walked up to these large scenes. And this, I think, was an important metaphor for how we experience great landscapes, because at least for me, when I'm in a special place like that and have this kind of landscape experience, this powerful moment, the first thing it does is it takes my breath away and makes me feel it viscerally. This is just amazing. And if it's seen as powerful enough to do that, then I start waxing philosophical. What is the nature of seeing? What is the nature of reality? What are we seeing? So I realized then with Deep Dream, I had an opportunity to get over the goal line and show people or convey experiences that achieve the same effect.
So I've looked at many of your paintings very closely, and I'd like to, I see that, yes, there are lots of images incorporated into the details of that. Can you talk a little bit about how the meaning of that imagery, because we never really talked about this, and whether you feel that the specific kind of imagery is enhancing what your vision is, or can you kind of dive deep into that?
Yeah. So Deep Dream has 84 layers in its neural network, and when these neural networks are sort of like black boxes. There's an input, there's an output, and through training and going through these various layers of the neural network, which is kind of analogous to how our visual system works, it comes to an answer. This is a cat on a log, or something like that. How that is weighted and what happens is really kind of hard to understand. But one thing that does happen is it starts, like our system does, by just initially recognizing things like lines and edges and basic shapes. As you proceed through the neural network, it starts to understand a little bit more of what it's seeing based upon what it was trained to recognize. In the case of Deep Dream, if you actually run an image through that process, the initial, or what I'd like to refer to as the higher levels of dreaming, are just really pushing the pixels into certain directions, lines, edges. They're rather geometric, abstract, impressionistic. But as you go deeper down with the layers that you dream with, they become more literal and animalistic, because the image database that Deep Dream was trained upon had a lot of animals and objects and stuff in it from consumer photos. I, as an artist, have a choice as to which target layer I use when dreaming my photography. I prefer the more abstract and impressionistic layers higher up, but there are times it makes sense to do things that are more animalistic and literal, especially like in wooded scenes where we know there are a lot of creatures, and whether or not we can see them, we know they're there, and it helps, me make my point artistically. So I do have some control over the look and feel of how the end result is and how abstract or literal it is with respect to these creatures and stuff that can emerge. I can subdue it completely and just make a really very flowy, abstract kind of appearance. And that's part of my choice. I can set the direction of the dreaming, but I can't control the details. And that's where things get interesting, because it's not a Photoshop filter. It's contextual. It's changing what it does based upon what it thinks it's seeing. So there's a lot of room for surprise and delight. The other thing that's really interesting about it is because it's part of an image recognition AI, it refuses to lose the details. It doesn't want to lose detail. So again, unlike a Photoshop filter, if you have high frequency detail in the scene, like reeds in the close-up marsh where you're overlooking a lake, all of that stuff stays. And even when the nominal size of the hallucinations is 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, if there's a thin reed, it's going to keep that, which makes the end result far richer and more interesting, which is another area of surprise and delight for me.
So you're constantly surprised.
Yeah, inevitably. Again, I can set the direction. I know where it's going in the general look and feel. And in fact, maybe this is not unlike what happens for painters, especially when you move into the abstract world of Jackson Pollock and this automatic sort of what happens when he lets his mind go and so on. There is that surprise and delight. It's an odd blend. I see AI as IA, artificial intelligence yields imagination amplification. It's still, being directed by me, but it's taking my work to places that I couldn't do on my own, and that make something new happen, which is really kind of fun.
So it's interesting when you're painting or drawing or doing a video or something like that, sometimes you make a mistake and you go, oh, I like that better than what I was thinking. Do you have the opportunity to interact with the program so that you can say, oh, I really like this direction. Can you go back and say, I like this direction. Can you do more of that?
That's a good question. The way that I employ my customized version of Deep Dream, which I should mention is unique in that it's super scaled. Deep Dream out of the box as open source code could not work on 500 megapixel images. So I had the good fortune of working with two brilliant engineers from Google and NVIDIA who spent almost 6 months of their spare time modifying the code for my purposes. But what I have in my workflow is a unique set of paintbrushes. In fine art, the brushstrokes that a painter employs that are kind of unique to them, and you can, once you start to know art history, you can tell from a distance, oh, that's a Renoir, or that's a Monet. It's quite evident. David Hockney, everyone, they have their own way of what's called mark making. So I use Deep Dream for mark making. As a sort of style of brushstroke and so on, I've become increasingly sophisticated with using the mark making at multiple scales, in multiple styles, all in one scene. So I can and have and continue to create sort of very sophisticated levels, hierarchical levels of mark making to achieve the effects that I want. But to your question specifically, those effects I prefer to work in a global manner through the entire image. I really don't mess locally with what's happening. Those are where the areas of surprise and delight come in. And it's just not something I want to do or choose to do. If the effect goes awry and isn't doing what I want it to do, I try a different set of brushstrokes, right? I try a different set of target layers and dreaming styles. But specifically to your question, I prefer to work with the AI in a global way, where it's almost like I'm saying, okay, and I like to use the jazz band analogy. I'm the leader of a jazz band. I write original compositions, but I have a virtuoso saxophonist here who's going to improvise on my work. He knows where I'm going with the song, but he's going to bring his own sensibilities to it. And it'll surprise and delight me, and I'm not going to make him redo his riff because there's a note or two I don't like. I may choose to do another take overall, but I don't like interfering with that sort of invention or that creation, right?
Are you a musician?
I am not.
Okay. Because it's very much like being in a band.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. You write something, and then you're playing with people because you like what they do, and they reinterpret everything you do. Yeah, actually, you call Deep Dream virtuistic collaborator, at least in this interview I read.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, in a way, you kind of have a relationship with the program. Can you kind of dive into that and talk about that?
Yeah, the virtuosic collaborator that I'm working with just has a unique way of seeing the world. And it is somewhat hallucinogenic. And the reason for that, I think, has some similarities to the way that we see the world in altered ways when we're under the influence of psychedelics. There is many ways to see the world, which psychedelics open your mind to. Someone once said, the world is not what you see, it's the way you see. And this software sees the world in 84 discrete different ways, all right? Again, there are 84 layers in this neural network, each one of which I can apply to my original photography. And as I said, I oftentimes double or triple that up at different scales and different styles and get like this real intricate fractal-like hallucination type thing happening. It is not fractal mathematics. Some people say, oh, it looks like fractals. It's not fractal math, but it's fractal-like in terms of those levels of detail. And that to me is important because we know, one of the things that I love about being in a great landscape, and it doesn't even have to be that special of a landscape, the universe, the world we live in is so rich at every level of scale. I can't but help see infinity in every leaf of every tree. And I now have a tool that allows me to express that philosophy, that feeling, that realization, and wow people and make them start to think about what it is they're experiencing.
A little William Blake in there for a moment, huh? How do you typically start a new piece? What's your motivation? What do you do?
All of my pieces start with that powerful landscape experience. And I have some ideas of what's behind that when that happens, when that bell rings. But it is really kind of bizarre because I could be hiking all day long in an absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous scenic place. Like, I like to use the example of Glacier National Park. But I will only set up my tripod and capture a scene when that bell rings, when that moment happens where I turn a corner and it takes my breath away. There's just something that happens in the right conditions with the right topography and the correct lighting angles and so on, where that bell rings and it's like, this is it, this is the moment. And that is when I'll attempt to capture it. Now, the interesting thing is, after all these years of practice, I still can't predict when a scene will actually come together and work well. I can predict when it won't, but I can't predict when it will. So when I wait for that moment, it doesn't always guarantee a great result, but I don't even bother trying if that moment doesn't occur. Now, why does that moment occur? What is that about? And I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you it feels like a recognition. It feels like not so much a discovery. People talk about mathematicians. Did you discover this theory or no, how does it go? Did you invent the theory or did you discover it? Right? I should start that over again. People talk about how mathematicians come up with their theories. Some people ask, did you invent it or did you discover it? Was it already there? The same thing happens with these landscape experiences. It feels like, and even though they are unique to the time and place, not just the place, but the time as well, when I have these experiences, it feels like it was waiting for me. It's a recognition of something. And I don't know exactly what's going on mentally, psychologically with that, but I think there's some kind of archetypal image in my consciousness that gets triggered when the scene comes together in that way, and that's when I choose to capture it. So that's just the start. That's probably a too long-winded description of how the whole process starts. It starts with that moment. In the entire Dreamscapes project, I would say that every piece I've created is true to a specific moment in time and space. Where I then take it is another story, and it goes through this convoluted multi-step process of assembly and there's the HDR blending, there's the panoramic stitching, there's the color gradation, then there's the hallucination, which might take multiple levels. But ultimately, what I'm shooting for is a single two-dimensional image presented, ideally, at a grand scale, in a way that moves people in the same way that the original scene moved me. Now, this is a tall order. I'm trying to translate not just a four-dimensional experience in time and space, but one in emotion and psychology as well, into a two-dimensional art object, trying to make the same thing happen. And to do that requires bounds. It requires the use of visual metaphors. It requires a number of aspects to make that translation that, again, all that matters to me ultimately is, does someone have the reaction, what am I looking at? And we can get more into the details of that reaction, but it's very consistent.
And you're talking about the entire process from taking the photo to working with your software to create the final image, not just the photo.
Right. The photo is just the starting point. I mean, in fact, I wince when people say things like, Dan's a great photographer. I don't even see myself as a photographer. I see myself as a landscape painter whose paints and brushes happen to be cameras, computers, and AI. I'm much more attuned to conveying the world the way the great landscape painters did. I think they had a much better grasp on how we see and feel and think about landscape experiences. So I guess you could say I see myself as a 21st century landscape painter.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, let's go. Yeah, this is an interesting. I'm not sure how you would answer this. I'll just read you the whole question. How do you balance the input of the AI and your own artistic vision? Where do you draw the line between human and machine creativity? And in a way, I kind of reinterpreted it as, where's the handoff?
Yeah, the use of the word handoff is really accurate in this case, because I truly do hand off the work. I hand off the computational photography art object or artifact that I've created to the AI and say, okay, now here's how I see the world with human eyes. I'm kind of forcing my camera to see the world the way humans do. That's part of what the whole XYZ photography breakthrough got for me. Now, how do you see it? Of course, again, I help direct in the case of that, how it sees it. But it really is a handoff. There's work at the end in terms of there's an amount of color shifting that happens with the different dreaming levels to different degrees that I tend to modulate, because sometimes they're a little too garish and I like to rein that in a little bit. So there's a little bit of work at the tail end, but it really is, I think, one of the clearest examples of human AI hybrid art, where it's a human and an AI working together in almost equal parts to create something new. It's, in my mind, very much a 50-50 proposition.
And what are the, it sounds like there's intermediary steps that you can comment on in the process. Can you just talk a little bit about I put it here, then I can see it at this point, and then at this point, that's,
Right. From the point at which I hand it off to the AI. So I'm fortunate that my engineers set me up with a quad GPU compute server on the Amazon cloud that enables me to test 4 different dreaming styles at a time, at least at medium to small scales, so I can get a sense of what the dreaming styles that I'm choosing are doing to the imagery. My job as the artist in driving the AI is to find the dreaming styles and scales and intensity and so on that work with the underlying imagery in a way that feels right to me. And that's purely artistic intuition. It's completely subjective. But I can look at dozens of attempts at a time and make a choice before I commit to the large job. So that's very much a part of the process, is just running it through a whole variety of different dreaming styles. It's not just the dreaming style. I have 5 dials I can control in the dreaming software. The biggest one is the target layer. Which of the 84 styles that each has a different motif might be the most appropriate for this particular scene.
Is there a wide range of styles?
It's very wide. It goes from, like I said, very abstract and impressionistic to very literal and animalistic, and things that are swoopy and swirly to things that are geometric and cross-hatched to things that have hints of eyeballs in them to things that have full faces, and then toward the end, completely manufactured birds and dogs, and what the people that played with Deep Dream in the first summer would joke about, the dog slugs, the little creatures and amphibians and insects that it would spontaneously create. So it can do all those things. But the parameters that Deep Dream exposes to me through the open source code are not just the choice of the target layer. There are 4 other parameters that are sliders that control things like the scale and intensity of the hallucinations, things like octave scale factor and number of octaves and iterations per octave and things like that I don't even know what it means. All I know is I had to spend months cataloging these effects to kind of get a handle on them and to understand what they mean. So between the 84 different motifs and these 4 sliding parameters of nuance, I'd like to say that Deep Dream gives me an infinite amount of variety within a finite repertoire of motifs, what I call a bounded infinity, right, of effects.
Or else you go crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have a bound to what the possibilities are, but with a lot of flexibility within. This is very consistent with, again, the mark making that painters develop over years. When you look at Camille Pissarro, who was one of the great pointillist impressionists, he didn't always do pointillism. He's most known, I think, for some of that stuff. But if you look at some of his early work, it looks nothing like the stuff that he's more famous for. But he put some bounds around it and then became really known for that sort of mark making. David Hockney, I think, is a great example. Here's a guy who, in his late 80s, has become a completely digital artist. He paints everything on iPads and creates these beautiful, vector-based prints that show in the Royal Academy in London, and that people, I'm sure half the people in the audience think they're actually paintings because there's no pixelation. They're vector-based, and they look fantastic. But with Hockney's inimitable style of mark making. Why? He hired a programmer to make custom brushes in the style of his marks. So now, rather than paint each leaf, he can swipe a stylus that spews out leaves on a tree in the classic style of David Hockney mark making. So it's kind of analogous to that in terms of the control that I have.
Pretty cool. Can you share any particularly memorable experience or feedback you've received from audiences about your work?
This is a great segue to, I mentioned how the audience reaction has been remarkably consistent. A couple years ago, I had a 7-month solo show in Half Moon Bay, which was my first experience to really understand over a period of time across a large number of people the kind of reactions that I get from my work. In this room, there was a centerpiece, an 8 by 16 foot light box, which is now in the Computer History Museum. And it would be the first thing that people would see when they approached the double doors opening the gallery. And the reaction was incredibly consistent. 4 things would happen in 99% of the cases. The first thing when people would approach it is they would stop in their tracks, take a deep breath, and say, wow. It happened like 99% of the time. Then they would cock their head and they would go, what is that? Is that a painting? Is it a photograph? Is it moving? And then they would get up close and they'd look at it over to from the side to see if it was 3-dimensional. And the third thing that would happen is the superlatives would come. Are you the artist? This is really magnificent, or something like that. Always nice to hear. But that wasn't the most interesting response to me, or the one I liked the most. That was great to hear, very validating. But the fourth thing that they would almost all say was music to my ears. They would say, I've never seen anything like this before. And as an artist, that's something you want to hear. It's been incredibly consistent and gratifying, and I don't know of anyone else that's doing what I'm doing here in terms of creating grand scale landscape experiences using a combination of cameras, computers, and AI. It's something I just stumbled my way into through the pure motivation of wanting to share great landscape experiences, and I cobbled it together in a very MacGyver-like way. Again, this AI was not created to make art. It was not trained on other people's art. It was just something that I saw that I could use for my purposes, and here we are.
Just a few more questions. I think we've answered this question. What future projects or collaborations are you excited about? Do you have any goals or aspirations for your work? The next thing?
Wow, that's such a great leading question, because you may or may not know, tomorrow I leave for my first artist residency, 6 weeks at Cornell University, where it all began. I spent 8 years at Cornell, did my undergraduate in architecture and my master's in 3D graphics. And it was coming from suburban New Jersey in the New York City metropolitan sprawl. It was the first scenically beautiful place I ever lived. And it's where I really, founded and grew my love for great landscapes. It's where I took my first photography class. It's where I saw the possibilities in computer graphics. I mean, honestly, since I entered the computer graphics lab in early 1981, any art I've made since that point has been purely digital. I've been a digital artist for 42 years. I've got this opportunity now that's come up to go back to campus for the next 6 weeks, starting tomorrow, to work under the auspices of my hero and mentor, one of the great founders of 3D graphics, Don Greenberg, who at 90 years old, believe it or not, is still teaching and vibrant and just amazing. And I'll be working in collaboration with another professor, Dr. Alex Kwan, who heads up psychedelic neuroscience at Cornell. there is that aspect to my work as well, that my experimentations with psychedelics in the late 70s and early 80s helped open my mind to the fact that the world is not just what we see, it's the way we see. And people can see that influence in my work, no surprise there. And I'd like to understand that more. A key part of what I am attempting to examine in this upcoming work that I'll be developing to a principal degree over these next 6 weeks for a potential exhibition later in the year, if the work is strong enough, is not just how landscapes are experienced. I've been working that angle deeply for the last many years. I'm really now interested in how landscapes are remembered. And what better place for me to explore that than in the place where this whole journey really started. So I'll be investigating Dr. Kwan's neuroimagery, his research findings, to kind of get a better grasp on what's happening in our visual cortex. Don Greenberg, coincidentally, is working on research right now around how the visual cortex processes images. So it should be a really interesting, like a good artist residency gives an artist the opportunity to work in an inspired setting and to collaborate with others in a very intensely concentrated way. And I can't tell you how excited I am to launch into that starting Thursday. I fly in tomorrow. I'll be arriving on campus, and miraculously, after 40 years working again with Don Greenberg and now Professor Kwan, to create a new body of work, which will start with new photography of Ithaca and the Finger Lakes region. I have a very clear vision of what I'm hoping to create, very, very clear, right down to the number of pieces and how they might come together. And now it's really a question of executing and being informed by these brilliant colleagues and mentors.
So you'll be using a similar process to what you have been doing? You're just doing a new body of work with a slightly different point of view?
Yeah, primarily, although there are tools that Don has in his arsenal, and students as well over the summer that I hope to tap for additional inspiration and possible, collaboration. One of the 12 pieces, for example, that I hope to create will be an augmented reality sculpture that will only exist in the exhibition if you look at it through your phone or iPad or Apple Vision Pro or so on. So hopefully I can get some help from Don's lab with respect to that.
Cool. Where would you be as an artist had you not encountered Deep Dream?
Well, I can answer that question based on where I was for the 4 years between my first breakthrough and my second breakthrough. The first breakthrough on the computational photography front opened up the opportunity to actually create artworks that could be marketed. And they were photographic in nature, but they were unusually vibrant and immersive and detailed. And as a result, I made some good headway licensing imagery for large stage backdrops at conferences like Dreamforce. Multiple times had printed my work 20 feet high by 45 feet wide. I had some scenes that were used for backdrops at car shows, like for the Toyota booth at the LA Auto Show. I think that one was something like 18 feet tall by 120 feet wide. So I was, And also, there is a thing with the kind of work that I'm doing, especially the sort of pastoral landscapes that I've been most attuned to, which have some human aspect to them, cultivated landscapes and signs of human civilization and so on. They're very peaceful. It turns out that pastoral landscape art is the only form of art that there's empirical evidence actually has a health benefits. It can actually reduce blood pressure and pain and elevate mood and so on. So I was making some good progress with getting placements in senior living centers, in healthcare environments, mental health clinics, and so on. And that probably would have continued in force if that second breakthrough hadn't happened. It was an interesting way of applying that work and making some money from it. But again, I felt like I was only 2/3 of the way to my goal. I was creating images that made you feel. You can see them and they made you feel, but they weren't really making you think in the way that was happening for me, especially when viewing these scenes in the early days under the influence of psychedelics. The dreamscapes did, and when my landscapes transitioned to dreamscapes, courtesy of my superscale version of Deep Dream, that really put me on the map in the fine art world. And that's when I started getting invited to show in galleries and at art fairs, and ultimately leading to what now is my exclusive representation with one of the leading international art galleries, Robelant and Voena, who is headquartered in Mayfair in London, where I had my first solo show in a global city just last October that ran for 10 weeks. So that's that would not have happened had AI not come into the fray and really launched my career in the fine art world.
I think you may have touched on this, but how do you see the role of AI evolving in the art world? Do you think it will change the way we define art and artists? That's a big question in the world right now, right? Including music and everything.
Yeah, I often get asked to speak and get interviewed about the application of AI in art, given that I started this almost 9 years ago, and suddenly in the last year or two, it's really taken off. And I have to remind people that the art world is not a monolith, and some distinctions need to be made. In particular, we need to distinguish fine art from art for hire. And a simple definition that I like to use to distinguish those two ends of the spectrum, and some artists do both, and there's the blending in between, but in my mind, fine art is art that an artist makes for themselves. Well, they make what they want to make, and if they're lucky, someone buys it, okay? Art for hire is art you're making specifically to meet a client's or collector's request. We're talking illustration, graphic design, set design, all these things are art for hire, okay? When it comes to the potential impact of AI on the livelihoods of fine artists versus art for hire artists, okay? I like to say that you don't have to worry about AI impacting the livelihood of fine artists at all, because things can't possibly get worse for fine artists. It is the hardest way you can try to make a living. Of my 4 careers, I can tell you it is the hardest. There's nowhere to go but up, okay? So let's not worry about fine artists making the art that they want. Set that aside. Art for hire, we have some issues. There are issues there, and some things that should have been done differently. I do think artists should have been asked to opt in, not have to opt out to these engines. That's water under the bridge now, unfortunately. That's I think, a tragedy. Certainly, if someone is using an AI image generator and prompting it with, in the style of a specific artist, that should be evident. That should be in the image metadata. It should be readily and easily exposed. And that leads to the question, well, should that artist then be compensated for that use? I would say no, because in my mind, it's fair use. All artists borrow, steal, whatever you want to say from, as Picasso would say, good artists copy, great artists steal, whatever. It's fair use, okay? But it needs to be recognized, and that exposure is the greatest thing for artists. Greg Rutkowski, the game artist whose work was often used in these early AI image generators that was in the news everywhere. He was part of a lawsuit to get compensated for this and all this. I never heard of Greg Rutkowski before this all happened. Now everybody knows who he is. That's a good thing. Getting exposure as an artist is one of the hardest things you can do. So at the minimum, that should be allowed. But I really do see these AI image generators as fair use of artists' work because it is doing exactly what I'm doing when I'm pulling from the art history of landscape painters throughout time. The Stanford professor David Eagleman, who's written numerous books on creativity, says that nothing is new under the sun, to paraphrase him. He says all works are some combination of bending, blending, and breaking what's come before. So I have a very liberal-minded, sense of AI image generators. I don't use them myself, not because I'm against them. It's because I'm still tapping the potential of my AI augmented process. But I think that some people are doing great things with them. And here's the distinction. It all comes down to the vision and the idea and the artistic intent. That is primary. That's the human element. How something is actually rendered is of much less interest. And the skill required to do that, well, now is becoming democratized. When you look at, there is some very good work coming out of these people using AI image generators, but there's a lot of crap, And the people with the best work, the strongest work, are the ones with the best ideas and the greatest vision, and that are deeply informed by art history and classic literature and know how to tap our emotions and so on. So there's still plenty of opportunity for artists of all sorts to use these tools and to benefit from them. It's never going to be easy. It's, as I said, it's so hard in art in general. And there are impacts with the democratization of fine rendering, but there's no turning back the clock. It's an unstoppable force. It's another brush. We've had these same arguments with photography back in the day. It's the same old thing.
Speaking of generative AI, speaking of all the people using deep AI, I think is one of them. There's a lot of different versions. What excites you about the fact that everybody can do this now using AI? Everybody can create their own art just by typing out words. What do you think of that?
So what I love about the democratization of illustration by virtue of these AI image generators is, again, because I believe so strongly in the power of the idea and the vision, is now suddenly there are people that don't have the talent or the background or the skill or the practice to express really strong and powerful ideas that can now express them. Ironically, I think that the people most qualified to use these AI image generators effectively are those folks back in college we used to mock because, like, how would they ever make money? These are the folks, these oddballs, that double majored in art history and English literature. Oh, you really don't want to make any money, do you? This is arcane things, right? Those people, those odd birds, will have the strongest ideas, given their background in classic literature, and the best eye to curate good results, given their background in art history, to create incredible art. People that perhaps never lifted a paintbrush, never learned how to draw, don't have the basic eye-hand coordination to do any of that, can now, with these tools, make extraordinary images that tell incredible stories and move people powerfully. That to me is a good thing. I believe the reason we're here on this planet is to be creative. That to me is the ultimate purpose of humankind and human consciousness, is to be creative. And I understand the economic disruption, but anything that gets in the way of enabling creative expression among our fellow humans, I think it's a bad thing. And anything that can actually move that along and express it is a good thing. Yeah, I mean, it could be overwhelming. We could be flooded with incredible, imagery and so on. It's kind of happening now. If you look at what's happened with video technology and computer graphics and so on, the ability to make incredible movie production episodic shorts and television is through the roof. You can't keep up with it. There's so much good content right now on all the different streaming platforms, from short entertainment to episodic television to, movies themselves. Anything that can be imagined can be expressed in full realism. And it's only going to get even more realistic as things like 3D video and the Apple Vision Pro and immersive entertainment comes to fore. I want to live in that world. I don't mind being saturated and overwhelmed by that stuff. I'll get to pick and choose what I want to watch, and I know there's a lot of stuff out there that I may not have the opportunity to see, but that's good stuff. It's great to be able to see humanity's creative urges flower in this way.
Cool. What do you see as the greatest potential harm of all this AI creation?
Well, in the short term, the greatest harm is the economic disruption. That will inevitably happen. We know that there are patterns to the way in which this disruption happens. You have booms and busts and displacement and is it really going to be different this time that people can't find other ways to make their living or to have their needs met? Even my financial advisor likes to say, when things are changing financially, oh, this time it's different. No, it's never different. It always follows similar patterns. I think we'll get through this, and it'll be for the better. It'll be painful as well at times. I don't know. I have to remain optimistic about it. The Axe Maker's Gift was a great book that talked about the two sides of technology. From the beginning, the hand axe, man's first tool, could enable them to skin hides and develop clothing and stuff like that, and clobber each other over the head and kill each other. And it's scary that our tools are becoming increasingly powerful and increasingly democratized. That could open us up to some severe impacts that, under the hands of the wrong people, could create some serious disruption. I'm a father. I hope that's not the case. I hope that we manage to get through this technological adolescence, to quote a phrase from the movie Contact,
Right.
and make it to the other side.
The eternal technological adolescence.
Yeah.
There seem to be issues about trust surrounding generative AI. How important are these issues of trust to the future of AI?
I'm not concerned about trusting AI. I'm concerned about trusting the humans that are driving AI. I think the worst abuses and disruptions that can come from AI will be coming from bad actors in human form, taking advantage of the power that AI yields. AI is not sentient. I don't believe it'll ever become sentient. It may appear to be sentient, you know, and that opens up a whole nother can of worms in terms of ethics in AI. But I do not fear that AI of its own accord will be an existential risk to us. It's the humans, you know, leveraging the AI in nefarious ways that I'm most concerned about.
Great answer. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind is sort of this nebulous notion of creativity and curiosity as key drivers to innovation and advancement and well-being and all those things. In my case, my adoption of AI was really, again, driven by those two factors, creativity and curiosity. I had a mission, I had an intention, I had an idea. I was curious about how various tools could help me, achieve my goals, and was rather agnostic, really, about where those tools were coming from and what agenda might be behind them. I think if you look at the mission of the Computer History Museum and the way in which it's documented this incredible evolution of technology in our modern world, I think the consistent theme you'll see behind the humans that made all of this technology possible is, I believe, that their own being driven by internal creativity and curiosity. That, I think, is the most uniquely human thing about us that demands celebration and encouragement and support. And let's not get too hung up on the specifics of the current technology that's being leveraged. Just stay creative and stay curious.
I think that's it then. Thank you.